Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to the course code Eng455, lecture number 23. As you can see that today's our lecture's topic is based on second language learning and theories. Before going into the details that what is meant by second language learning and what the different theories talk about this, the way they talk about it, the way they define this process of second language learning, what we have done so far. If you remember, in our previous two lectures we actually discussed in detail about how the language it is developed. Language, such a complex thing, and the infants right from their birth start learning it, and within few years from their birth they become the fluent speaker of that language. They acquire the language in a way which is which we cannot explain, though the different theories are there which try to explain this phenomenon. In our previous lecture, we discussed in detail is what is meant by first language, how the first language is acquired, and what are the different theories, what are their ideas about this process of first language acquisition. With respect to that, we talked about the behaviorism, nativism, cognitive approach, and interaction approach. Again, there were a lot of theories, but we picked only 4 theories to talk about, which are very well known in the field of linguistics with respect to this explanation of first language acquisition process. So first language acquisition acquired, mother tongue acquired, native language acquired. But now what? That when we grow up and we need another language, then what is going to happen? Today, that is the focus of our lecture. Today we will talk about what is meant by second language, what it is all about, and what is this second language learning or acquisition. What is the difference between first language and second language, and how do learners they acquire this second language. And at the same time we will talk about the different theories who explain this phenomena of second language acquisition or learning. If you see again and again, with respect to second language, I prefer to change the terms from acquisition to learning. With the first language, it is always and always acquisition. With the second language, some linguists they call it acquisition, some linguists they call it learning. Now again, there is a clash between different schools of thought who claim that first language is always acquired and second language is always learned. We acquire first language, but we learn second language. So this way but at the same time there are certain linguists who use the same time. They say that the way we acquire the first language, the way we acquire the second language. So it is all about the acquisition. So still, the idea of this first language as acquisition or as learning is a bit confused. So let's see what is this second language acquisition. The second language acquisition means to learn a language other than the mother tongue. Now over here, I'm not saying the language, second language means any second language, any language that you learn at a priority number 2. No. Actually, what happens in monolingual societies, yes, the second language means the second language. But in bilingual societies, it is, and in multilingual societies, already at the very beginning stage, the little children, they acquire 1 or 2 languages, or sometimes even 3 languages. So they are acquiring. They are in the process of acquisition of that first language, and all these languages, because they are their native languages, or because they are somehow related to their context, so they are acquiring them as first language. The same way, for example, I as a resident of this bilingual society, I have learned Punjabi and Urdu right at the same level, right, and at the same place. I do not know which language I started as first, but I was exposed to both languages randomly. My father was used to speak with me in Urdu, my mother was used to speak me in Punjabi. So I picked both languages as the first languages and acquired them both at with same proficiency level, with same satisfaction level. So the second language over here does not mean the very second language that I've learned with that first language. But the second language is meant that after that acquiring the native language or languages, after some time I tried to learn another language. That would be a second language. So second language means any language which is a foreign language. You can say that it is a foreign language. Like in our society, English is a foreign language. So we learn English at a third place, but still we call it a second language because the Urdu and Punjabi, they are required right at the very first level. So my second language is English. Or a foreign language is English. So this is what is meant by second language acquisition. Second language acquisition refers to the phenomena or the learning of any language other than the native languages. The languages which I were not exposed to in my childhood, rather I was exposed to them after some years for different reasons, for different under different perspectives and under different environment. Maybe I'm not getting that second language learning at home. Maybe I'm getting that education at school or universities or different levels. So this way, that is the second language, the language other than the native languages, and the learning of that language. So that's why the linguists, they have the certain clash regarding the term of acquisition or learning. That first language acquisition, second language learning. So, but again, as I told you, some linguists, they still say no. Okay, what is so first language acquisition? So the same way the children have second language acquisition. But again, I'm not going into the details of this clash. I'm just calling it okay. If first language acquired, fine with it. We are done with this theory. But now we are going to talk about the second language acquisition or learning. I'm going to use the both terms because second language is learned. But learning is also the acquiring of knowledge. So what is the difference? No big difference, I would call it. So I would stand in middle of the both schools of thought and would use the both terms with the second language. So be clear. The second language here means any language not acquired as mother tongue, not acquired as the native language or languages. Now over here, what is the difference between first language and second language? What makes it a second language a different thing than the first language? Most people, they agree that there is a fundamental difference between first language and second language. I have depicted them over here as L1 and L2. L1 stands for first language and L2 stands for the second language. Now what is the difference? All children, now the linguists, what are the differences they propose between the L1 and L2? Number one, all children learn their L1, that is the first language, easily and well, whereas adults vary in their ultimate mastery of a second language. This is the first difference. Children throughout the world learn their native language at ease, effortlessly, in a way difficult to comprehend. A child right from the birth starts learning the most complicated language he or she is exposed to, and within few years gets a mastery of that language. But over here, on the other hand, when we start learning a second language, we face difficulties. We are not at that much ease. Have you ever seen the children, they are facing difficulties with learning a language? A 1-year child and saying, I can't understand this language. I'm not getting language. No, the children, they are very much satisfied, they are very much at ease, they do it effortlessly. But second language learning, think about the people going to learn the second language, feeling so much difficulties, face difficulties, and they panic to learn that second language. And they do not get that mastery of that language. You know, after learning the second language, we have the good producers of that second language, we have the average producers of that second language, and sometimes we have the poor learners of the second language. I mean, every time, for example, 3 students went to an institute for learning English language as second language, and after 6 months, one student can speak fluently, the other one average, and the third one cannot speak at all. So again, the mastery level is different. On the other hand, in the case of the first language, throughout the world, all children, they attain the language without any difficulty, and they get the mastery of that language. Second difference is that children do not need to be taught their first language, where adults benefit from formal instruction. At homes, the 2-month child, he is not going to any school. The children, they are not setting an arrangement setting an environment to make him learn a language. No, they do it unconsciously. I mean, they do it. They do not need any formal settings. They do not need any formal instruction. There are no parents going to tell our children, okay, today I am going to teach you about these words. A 3-month child or 4-month child, okay, I'm going to tell you about the phonology of English language. No, you are not giving any formal instructions to the children. You are not giving the specific environment. But on the other hand, the second language learner, they have to attend the institutes, they have to attend the courses, they have to receive the formal instructions to learn a second language. Another difference, the children are intrinsically motivated to learn their first language, and whereas the adults' mastery of second language is dependent upon attitude, motivation, and aptitude. I mean, the first language learners, children, very much satisfied. They do not need no need to motivate them. Still, they would learn the language. Still, they would get the mastery of the language, even that their parents, they are motivating them or not motivating them. But on the other hand, the second language learners, their language mastery depends upon the level of motivation they get, the level of aptitude they have for this second language, and at the same time, their attitude towards that language learning. So these factors, they influence their mastery of language. Whereas the first language learners, they do not have this problem, these issues at all. In their native language, when I'm acquiring my first language, I got the mastery of it. When I tried to learn my second language in schools, I faced a lot of difficulties, and still I was unable to get that proficiency. I mean, still at this level, I feel ease and I feel relaxed while communicating in native language rather than any other language. So why the student? I mean, the children, they acquire the first language, and I was exposed to the second language. I tried my best. The teachers tried my best, and I was given exposure to second language. But still, why I was unable to get that much proficiency? Why the learners? I mean, you know, after getting 16 years of education, after spending several amount of hours in language learning institutes, but still the students, they are not that much proficient. Maybe some exceptions are there, some exceptions of students are there who get the proficiency in that second language, but majority of the students, they either remain the average or the bad users of that second language, especially with respect to Pakistani society. That in our society, the student of a matric class, he is exposed to this language, second language, English, right from the nursery class till the matric level. I mean, and nowadays, right from the nursery class till the matric, 10 years of exposure to English language, but still they are not the good speakers of English language. So again, what are the reasons? So this is all about the second language acquisition, is the study of about all these things. And finally, In the study of second language acquisition, we study that why some learners appear to achieve native-like proficiency in more than one language. Now another thing, that it has been observed that when the students are exposed to second language, again, as I told you, that majority of them, they are failed to get that much proficiency level. But still there are certain cases where the children, they are the exceptionally good learners of that second language, and they speak a second language the way they can speak their native language. How this thing happens? Why the people, they are more, some people, they are more proficient in English, in this second language, and they are as much at ease to communicate in that second language as they feel and with their first language. So how these exception cases are there? So the study of all these factors, it is included when we study the second language acquisition process. Now the question that arises over here is that how the learners, they acquire a second language. The simplest answer is they acquire the second language the way they acquire the first language. But it does not happen. As you have seen that in second language learning, we have lot of issues that are raised by different linguists and researchers. So what is the difference between that learning first language and learning a second language? And when we learn or acquire a second language, what do we do? How do we learn a second language? The first thing is that learners acquire a second language by making use of existing knowledge of the native language. When they are exposed to their native language, when the children, they are exposed to their native language, they do not have a prior knowledge of any language before that. They are just like, you can say, they are the blank tablets, and they acquire the first language. But when they are going to learn the second language, they are not blank. They already have something in their minds. They have the patterns, the formulas, the structures, the vocabulary of the first language already there, the native language already there. And then they use that existing knowledge to learn the second language. So this way, they have the first language as well with them, and then using those models, they acquire the second language as well. And usually they use the strategies, the same strategies that are there very much there in their native languages, and then with the help of that first language knowledge, they try to internalize the second language. Then another thing, these processes serve as a means by which learners construct an interlanguage. What is an interlanguage? An interlanguage is actually a transitional system reflecting the learner's L2 knowledge. They start learning a second language, and till the time they become the proficient speakers of that second language, the interval between these 2 points is the interlanguage process. The stage at which they are acquiring, they are learning the second language, they haven't fully learnt a second language. So these patterns, they would help to go through this interlanguage state. And finally, that communication strategies that are employed by the learners to make use of existing knowledge to cope up with communication difficulties. They use the existing knowledge of their language, and by using that existing knowledge of the native language, they try to learn the second language. So these are some of the things that the second language learners do while acquiring or learning a second language. Now we will talk about some of the strategies that the learners, they usually employ to learn a language. The linguists and the researchers, they have highlighted the 3 types of strategies. According to them, the learners of second language, they use 3 types of strategies. They use the cognitive strategies, they use metacognitive strategies, and they also use the social strategies. What are these? By cognitive strategies, they mean that the children, they use the learner of the second language. I cannot say that children, usually they are the adults, sometimes the children, sometimes the adults as well. So the learners of the second language, they use their cognitive abilities to relate new concepts to prior knowledge. Now, what are the new concepts and what is the prior knowledge? Yes, the prior knowledge of their first language, the new concepts of second language. So what do? They use their mental abilities to relate them both. Their prior knowledge of first language and their new knowledge of second language, and they make a relationship between them. Secondly, they use the metacognitive abilities. And these metacognitive strategies are those which help with organizing a personal timetable to facilitate an effective study of the L2. To learn the second language in a better way, they devise some certain strategies using their metacognitive abilities. And finally, they use their social strategies to include looking for opportunities to converse with native speakers. The people who are the learners of second language, if they are exposed to the native speakers of second language, they learn language in a better way than the students who are not exposed to the native speakers of that second language. So these are the social strategies that the children they use, or the learner of second language, they try to communicate with the native speakers of the second language, and this way they acquire a better knowledge about that second language. So these are some of the strategies that the learners can use to learn a second language. Either they are going to use one of them or two of them or either three of them. Any combination they can use to acquire a second language. But at the same time, we have some theories about the second language process, about the second language learning process. We have many theories like universal theory, again the behaviorism, innate ISM, cognition, connectionism, and sociocultural perspective. All of these theories, they talk about this second language learning process in their own, according to their own areas of interest and according to their own frameworks of ideas. So let's see how do they observe this, do they define this process of second language learning. The first theory that I've chosen to talk about the second language learning is the universal theory. Now this is a universal theory. It defines linguistics universals from two perspectives. Firstly, the data-driven perspective, and secondly, the theory-driven perspective. Now, what is meant by the data-driven perspective? This data-driven perspective, it studies, it looks at the surface levels of all the languages and tries to compare them. In the universally, what are the languages which are there? They try to get the data out of these languages, they try to compare them. And from this data perspective, they get the data, okay, how the languages, they differ in various ways. And then they try to learn that language, they try to internalize that knowledge on the basis of the differences, the different languages they have. So this perspective is known as the data-driven perspective. And this data-driven approach considers system external factors or inputs as the basis. The system, it is externally observed. The language, it is externally observed, the external structure in comparison to the other language's structure. So this is the external, the data-driven approach is externally based on languages. But on the other hand, we have internal structure approach as well, known as the theory-driven approach. This is the second perspective of universal theory. In theory-driven approach, we are concerned with the internal structure of the language we are learning. The language that we are learning as second language, we are not concerned with its relation, with its difference from all the other languages. Rather, we will learn the internal structures of that language, how this language is, what are the rules inside that language, what are the structures which are used in that language. So this is internal studies of that language. So this way, the system internal factors, they are those found in cognitive and linguistic process. So mean the way the inside the language, what are the things inside a language, how this language, what are the structures used inside this language. So we are concerned in second language with totally with the second language, rather than taking that language as a model and comparing it with other languages and then learning it. So these are the two perspectives of universal theory. After the universal theory, we have the behaviorist theory. If you remember, in our previous lecture, we have already discussed this behaviorist theory with respect to first language acquisition. The proponent, B.F. Skinner, who talked about the first language acquisition process, that the children, they imitate, they get the stimuli and they response, they imitate the models provided by their parents or the other persons around them, and then they get reinforcement and after that motivation, they develop language just like they develop other habits. So that was the perspective of behaviorism with respect to first language acquisition. And behaviorists, they explain the second language acquisition process in the same way. Mean, to acquire a second language, you need to follow the same pattern. You imitate the things provided in the second language learning. You practice them. You know, look, for example, in a class, you go to a class of nursery and the teacher is telling A for apple, B for ball. So pattern, and they are having drills and they practice these things and to learn that language. So this is the imitation. They imitate their teachers and they practice it, and according to their practice, they get the reinforcement from the teacher. And when they get the reinforcement, according to the nature of reinforcement, they develop it as a habit. So again, the behaviorists, they explain the second language learning process same in the way the children acquire their first language. There's about this second language acquisition with respect to behaviorism. It was discussed by Brooks and Lado, and they emphasized, they took the model of Skinner and they emphasized the role of mimicry and memorization with respect to second language learning. Further, this behaviorist theory, it talks about the process of second language learning, that a person learns a second language, starts off with the habit formed in the L1. Mean, a person has already acquired a first language as habit in the same way that the habits are developed, and they follow the same pattern to learn a second language, and they interfere from the first language. They already have a knowledge that what are the things required to learn a language, and they follow the same pattern to learn the second language. Behaviorism was often linked to the contrastive analysis hypothesis, CAH. What is this contrastive analysis hypothesis? According to it, that where there are similarities, mean the children, they're learning second language, and the areas where this second language is, the second language, they are similar to their first language they have already acquired, they would feel it ease to learn that area. But the areas where the second language, it is in contrast to the first language, they would feel difficulty. So this is contrastive analysis hypothesis, that they compare and contrast the two language models, and wherever they will find the similarities, they will easily pick that area of second language. But wherever they will find the contrast, the difference, it would be hard for them to get that second language over that area. So this was the idea of behaviorism with respect to second language learning. But again, on this CAH, mean that there are certain criticism. What is that criticism? Is that though a learner's L1 influences the acquisition of an L2, mean this is established fact. Yes, the first language mean knowledge, it influences some way the second language knowledge, but the researchers have found that language 2 learners do not make all the errors predicted by CAH. Mean CAH, it predicted some types of errors while learning second language, but it does not happen always. Many of their errors are not predictable on the basis of their L1. For example, potted, cooker, meaning a person who cooks better than. So this way they do not have this knowledge. Secondly, some errors are similar, mean across learners from a variety of L1 backgrounds. Mean the second language learners, they are learning second language, but originally a student is from Chinese origin, a student from Pakistani origin, a student from Turkish origin. But still all of them, they make the same kind of errors with this second language. So this CH is unable to explain this. After the behaviorism, we have the next approach, that is nativism, again also known as innatism, based on universal grammar idea by Chomsky. And the more important approach that is followed with respect to second language acquisition, with respect to innatism, is the Creation's monitor model. So let's see what are these things. If you remember the idea of universal grammar or LAD that was proposed by Chomsky with respect to first language acquisition. But on the other hand, Chomsky, he himself didn't provide any explanation for the second language acquisition with respect to his idea of LAD and UG. But some linguists who were interested in their idea, who were motivated by his ideas, they tried to prove this, they tried to explain this second language learning process by following the same model of that innatism theory. Now linguists working within the innatist theory, what they did, that they argued that universal grammar, it offers the best perspective to understand SLA, standing for second language acquisition. So universal grammar can explain the why second language learners eventually know more about the language than they could reasonably have learned. I mean, universal grammar can explain this idea of that how the second language learners, they learn some of the aspects of they learn the rules, structures, everything in second language, but with their knowledge of that second language, they become creative. This idea of creativity can only be explained with the idea of universal grammar. Some other linguists, they argue that universal grammar is not a good explanation for SLA, especially by learners who have passed that critical period. What is that critical period? Actually, the linguists, they have defined that there is a certain age limit at which the children, they can become the better learner of any language they are exposed to. I mean, if the children, they are exposed to the second language, right, I mean, in their childhood, they would be better, they would acquire that language in a better way, in the native way than the children who were exposed to second language in the later years of life. So according to that, in that critical stage, if the children, they have passed that critical stage, then they would not be able to produce that much good structures of second language. So no explanation could be provided with respect to UG. So both again, with respect, in the field of innatism, we have both sides. We have people who argue that the universal grammar can explain the second language learning process. But on the other hand, we have some linguists who say that this cannot be done with the help of UG or universal grammar. Now, because we are talking about innatism, so we will follow those linguists who think that universal grammar is fine to explain the second language acquisition process. Now, how this universal grammar works in second language learning, acquisition or learning? There are again two viewpoints. According to the first viewpoint, the nature and availability of universal grammar are the same in L1 and L2 acquisition. I mean, according to them, the children, they have the same universal grammar, whether they are learning the first language, whether they are the second language. The amount of universal grammar is same at both levels. And the adult second language learners, like children, they neither need nor benefit from error correction and metalinguistic information. So these things change only the superficial appearance of language performance and do not affect the underlying competence of new language. I mean, this was also proposed by Creation's monitor model. We will talk about that in next slides. But let me before that, let me see what is the second perspective. According to second perspective, universal grammar, it is present at the stage where the learners, they are acquiring the second language. But it is not of the same nature, it is not in the same amount as the L1 learners, they have this. When the L1 learners, they have better amount of UG and they have the better exposure to UG, better nature of UG than the learners of the second language, and as a result, the second language learners, they need to be given some explicit information about what is not grammatical in second language. Otherwise, they may assume that some structures of L1 have equivalence in L2, when in fact they do not. So these are the two perspectives that how the universal grammar, it works in second language acquisition process. But as I mentioned in beginning, that in this innatism, one model is very much important that is usually used by linguists to describe the second language acquisition with respect to nativism theory, and that is the Creation's monitor model. Now, according to this Creation models, it is comprised of actually the 5 stages, 5 hypotheses: the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, the input hypothesis, and finally the affective filter hypothesis. And these all 5 hypotheses, they work together to make a monitor system while learning a second language. But let's see what all these stages are. I mean, how these hypotheses, they individually work, what they say. The first hypothesis in Creation's monitor model is the acquisition learning hypothesis. Now, according to Creation, there are 2 things. There is acquisition, there is learning, and both things are simultaneously happen while acquiring a second language. Acquisition is unconscious, learning is conscious. Acquisition is that we are exposed to second language and we understand it with no conscious effort. Learning is we are putting our efforts to learn a second language. It is a conscious effort, and these both acquisition and learning steps, they happen simultaneously. And we have so we can say that we at the same time, with respect to second language learning, acquisition and learning things both are going on. And according to Creation, acquisition is more important because acquisition is unconscious or subconscious, whereas learning is conscious effort. So our fluency depends upon our unconscious effort rather than the conscious effort. Then after this acquisition learning hypothesis, Creation further explains the monitor hypothesis. Once he said that okay, while learning a second language, we have acquisition of second language, we have learning the second language. Both are going side by side. Now what happens that acquired system, it acts to initiate the speaker's utterances and is responsible for a spontaneous language use. So acquisition is there, learning is there. Acquisition system, it helps the learner, second language learner, to become a fluent speaker. But the learning thing, it is monitoring the acquisition thing. So the monitor hypothesis. So who is monitoring? The learning thing, because it is a conscious effort. You have consciously learned the rules and patterns of second language. So this setup will monitor the first setup. So this is what is meant by monitor hypothesis. Then in the third level, we have the natural order hypothesis. According to Creation, these all learning things does not happen in a proper order. We cannot argue that okay, the children they move in an order. They learn easy things first and then they move to learning of complicated things. No, there is order, but that order is not, settled by the learners, not by the linguists. And there is no explanation. But even sometimes happens that children, while learning a second language, they learn the complicated rules, but they are unable to understand the simplest rules. Like they learn how to make the passive but they are not good in learning how to change how to use the irregular forms of verb. So this is called natural order hypothesis. Then the input hypothesis. Acquisition occurs when one is exposed to language that is comprehensible and that contains I+1. Now what is meant by I+1 means that the children, they learn a language, a second language in a better way if its structure is somehow similar to their already acquired first language. So they have the input hypothesis that the if input contains forms in the input mean the second language exposure, if that input is similar to their previous knowledge of structures and language forms they have with respect to this first language, then they would be at more they would comprehend that second language in a better way, and their acquisition would occur with much better pace. Finally, we have the affective filter hypothesis. Now the third affect here refers to feelings, motives, needs, attitudes and emotional state. The matter of second language learning depends how much we are motivated to learn it, how much we have feelings to learn it, how much we desire to learn it. If it is our need, maybe we are not that much, if it is need driven, we are not very much putting efforts if it is our something related to our emotional setting. So the affective filter hypothesis also explains that how the second language learners, they are going to learn the second language. So according to these 5 stages, these 5 hypotheses, according to Krashen monitor model, that second language learners, they acquire second language. If I summarize this Krashen monitor model, then Krashen's monitor model has been very influential in supporting communicative language teaching. Communicative language teaching, CLT, it is a technique to teach second language used by the second language teachers, that they focus the communications between the native speakers and learners of second language to get the better knowledge of that second language. So this Krashen model, it favors that model, and it focuses on using language for meaningful interaction and for accomplishing tasks rather than on learning rules. The purpose is not to learn second language, the purpose is to use that second language, and Krashen model is a better explanation for using second language rather than learning second language. At the same time, Krashen hypothesis, all 5 hypotheses are intuitively appealing, but those hypotheses are hard to be tested by empirical evidence. They sound, when we talk about them, when we read them, they sound very much true to us, but still we do not have any empirical evidence to prove them. So after universal theory, behaviorism, and innatism, we have another theory for second language acquisition. Let's see what is that. Cognition, or it is also known as information processing theory. Now the cognitive psychologists who work on this information processing model, what do? They compare languages acquisition to the capacities of computers for storing, integrating and retrieving information. They consider that the idea of language learning is same the way the computers, they acquire certain things, they integrate certain ideas, and they store certain ideas. So this computer storing process and the language storing process of the children, it is something same. Secondly, these proponents of cognition, they do not think that humans have a language specific module, that is LAD, Chomsky idea. Chomsky said that the children, they have a LAD, a language acquisition device, already implanted in their brains before birth. But this cognition, approach, the linguists related to it, they do not accept any idea of LAD. They do not believe that the children, they have the innate ability to learn a language. They do not assume that acquisition and learning are distinct matter process. Again, for them, whether you are acquiring the first language or you are acquiring the second language, both are same, no difference at all. Another thing is that they see second language acquisition as the building up of knowledge that can eventually be called automatically for speaking and understanding. Mean you learn a second language, and then from that language you develop your cognitive abilities, they develop, and you start using the second language. The proponents of cognition or cognitive approach, or the information processing approach, they introduce the 4 steps in second language acquisition, that is attention processing, skill learning, restructuring, and transfer appropriate processing. So let's see what all these are. The first one, attention processing. According to proponents of cognitive theory, or information processing theory, the learners of second language, they at the very first level, they have to pay attention. They have to learn how to pay attention. To whatever language they are learning, they need to pay attention to it. So attention processing the learning the art of giving attention is the first step to acquire that language. It also suggests that there is a limit to how much information a learner can pay attention to, or engage in at one time. Maybe if I'm constantly exposed to second language for several hours, I won't be giving that much attention. The time, it depends how much. If there is a limited type of information that is coming to me within the limited time, then definitely I can pay attention. So this pay attention processing is very much important factor with respect to language learning, second language learning. And gradually, through experience and practice, information that was new becomes easier to process, and learners become easily able to access it, and even automatically. So this also explains that why the learners of second language, they take more time than the learners of first language, because they at the very first level they have to train themselves to give attention to that second language. After the attention processing stage, what is more important in cognition or information processing theory is that the second language learners, they learn second language just like a skill. The language learning is just like a skill learning. And this suggests that more learning, including language learning, starts with declarative knowledge, knowledge like of that. And then declarative knowledge later on gets changed into the procedural knowledge. Just like a skill, that for a skill, if you want to learn a skill at the beginning, they teach you, okay, these are the things. They give you declarative knowledge, and later on, with the help of that knowledge, they tell you how to use that knowledge. So from declarative knowledge you are transferred to the procedural knowledge. For example, when you are going to drive a car and learn driving a car, the instructor would first step give you the declarative knowledge. What are the different things in their car? What is an accelerator? What is a brake? What is a pedal? What is the power gauge? He would give you a declarative knowledge, and then he would give you the procedural knowledge, how to drive a car. So this is a step-by-step process, skill learning. Similarly, when you acquire a second language, you get the declarative knowledge. You are taught, okay, this is the rule for forming passive rules, for passive sentences or negative sentences or in English. And then by using the declarative knowledge, you actually use that language. Again, moving from declarative knowledge stage to procedural knowledge stage. And this makes the second language learning as just like a skill learning thing. Restructuring in second language learning, we restructure things to learn in a better way. It is not that once you have given me a structure and I have to follow that structure, I will restructure the things. And from restructurings I will learn things. For example, if I see and I saw, But instead of that, I will restructure it. I see it, I saw it, and then I will learn from these restructuring that which form is the correct one and which is the wrong one. And then by restructuring the second language things, I will learn it in a better way. And finally, in this information processing is the transfer appropriate processing. Once we acquire this second language as a skill or something like that, then we transfer this appropriate processing. And this hypothesize that information is best retrieved in situations that are similar to those in which it was learned. I mean the situation, if we associate the learning of things with the real life situations, then that learning would be much better than learning that thing out of that situation. For example, the better way to learn the names of grocery items in second language is to go to an actual grocery shop and to learn them. That the situation would be very much helpful, and that context always remains in your mind with that your knowledge. So and the learners, they relate, they transfer this knowledge. So the context is very much important. And this can explain why the knowledge that is acquired mainly in rule learning or drill activities may be easier to access on tests that resemble the learning activities. But on the other hand, if learners' cognitive resources are occupied with a focus on meaning in communicative activities, they may find grammar tests very difficult. So this way, they transfer appropriate processing from one step to another in the second language learning. So this was all about how this cognitive approach or how this information processing approach views the second language learning technique. Now another theoretical stance of connectionism. The name makes it clear that makes a connection. The connectionist, the linguists who are concerned with this connectionism argues, they attribute that the greater importance to the role of environment than to any other specific innate knowledge. Another important, not your behavior imitation is important, not your innate devices are important, not your cognitive abilities are important, rather environment is important in language learning. They connect that what is innate, yes, we can say that there is something innate, but that what is innate is simply the ability to learn. We innately have the ability to learn, but we innately do not have the knowledge of that language. So they refute the idea of universal grammar, but they say we do not have any knowledge about the language as innate. But rather what we have as innate is the ability to learn. We come into the world as learners of language. We have the ability to learn, and then the language to which we are exposed, we learn it, we acquire it. And this connectionism, it emphasizes the frequency with which learner encounters specific linguistic features. It relates to the frequency and the linguistic features. The number of times you are exposed to a linguistic feature, you get a better learning. And the less number of times if you are exposed to a linguistic feature, you won't be able to learn that in a better way. So there is a relationship between input and the frequency with which features occur together. Connectionists, they suggest that learners gradually build up their knowledge of language through exposure to the thousands of instances of the linguistic features they hear or see. How they learn language? Because of the exposure they get towards that language. And eventually, learners develop strong mental connections. That's why it is known as connectionism, that they develop strong mental connections between the elements they have learned. Thus, the presence of one situational or linguistic element will activate the others in learner's mind. If you have learned some linguistic elements with related to a situation, and when you are going to actually use it, if you remember just one item of that, they would automatically arise or generate the all or recap all the other linguistic elements that are present there already related to it. Then evidences comes from the observation that much of the language we use in ordinary conversation is predictable or formulaic. We use certain formulas to use language, and language is often learned in chunks larger than single words. Larger than single words, smaller than maybe sentences, but that language is always learned in a better way when it is in the form of chunks. Then we have sociocultural perspective. Again, Vygotsky. You have seen that Vygotsky has also presented his ideas regarding the first language acquisition. He uses the same model to explain how the second language learning is acquired. According to his sociocultural theory, that the language development takes place in the social interactions between individuals. So speaking immediate thing, as you remember, we talked about zone of proximal development. So when there is a support from interaction with an interlocutor, the learner is capable to perform. When you have a better communicative level with the native speakers of a language, you would learn that language in a much better way than while just getting a drill of that language or getting a learning of language. For example, the biggest support of this thing is that the children learning English over here now are going to be a good speakers of that language. But children, Urdu over here acquired as first language, 5-6 stages, 5-6 years or 7 years, they get a transfer from Pakistan to somewhere in England, go over there, settle over there, communicate with the native speakers, and the next 3, 4, 5 years they would be as good speakers of English language as the native speakers are, because they socially interact with the speakers of that language, the speakers of that second language. And this socio-cultural theory is very much important of Vygotsky with respect, and nowadays it is quite popular with respect to these methodologies of second language learning. So what we have today studied, that if I talk about second language, yes, second language other than first language that we learn, but we learned about so many theories that explain how we acquire second language, but there is no agreement between any theories. No complete theory is there which we can adopt as the best explanation for second language learning process. All the theories, they talk about their own beliefs, they talk about their own experiments, they talk about their own evidences to support their ideas. But still we still remain with a question mark. But what are the theories that we discussed? Were the behaviorism, innatism, information processing and connectionism, and then interactionist position. All of these theories we discussed today. We talked about them, that how they explain this process of second language learning. How do they see this process? As a different process from first language acquisition, but at the same time, some of these theories, they try to explain the second language acquisition process in the same way they try to explain the first language acquisition process, like the behaviorist and like the nativist. They use the same model to explain the both language acquisition process. But on the other hand, some methodologies are there which take both of them as different approaches and try to explain them in different ways. So that was what we studied today. And with this, we are finished with this language, with our lectures series. 3 lectures we have delivered. I have delivered that how the language it is developed in children, with respect to first language acquisition, how it is developed, and what are the theories that explain that process. And then second language, what is meant by second language acquisition, and what are the different theories that explain the second language learning process. So there is an end of all the lectures on language development. Inshallah, next week we will come with a new topic. So till then, Allah Hafiz.